The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a 1974 slasher film directed by Tobe Hooper, who would later direct other classics such as Poltergeist and Salem's Lot. 5 friends find themselves stranded in rural Texas after their car runs out of gas. The town is populated with unhinged rednecks led by the chainsaw-wielding Leatherface. Howdy folks, welcome back to Garage Slasher-thon, where every day for the month of October, we revisit a slasher movie. Today we're talking about one of the most notorious slasher movies, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And dare I say, not only one of my favorite slasher movies, but one of my all-time favorite horror movies. I love this movie. It's so much fun to watch. It's really unsettling and weird and gross. This movie was directed by Tobe Hooper, who's recently passed away. And I remember when he passed away, there was kind of like this conversation as to like what is Tobe Hooper's legacy, because he did direct Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He directed, quote unquote, directed Poltergeist. We don't know if he directed it or how much of it was Steven Spielberg. There's a lot of like rumors of that he was like maybe a little difficult to work with on set, and because of that, another director had to step in, Steven Spielberg. And he also did Salem's Lot, which I reviewed Salem's Lot when I was doing my Garage Stephen King-a-thon, and I didn't really like Salem's Lot that much. It was outdated. Nonetheless, the monumental achievement that is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is enough to cement his legacy as what I think is an all-time great horror movie director. The movie opens and it really has this like fake documentary feel to it.
That the indictment is only one of a series to be handed down as a result of a special grand jury investigation,
Which made many people believe that this is based on a true story. It is inspired by true events to a certain extent, but it really is the product of Tobe Hooper's mind. As a matter of fact, when he had to come up with the idea of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this guy with a chainsaw slashing people, his inspiration behind that was that he was Christmas shopping. And when he was Christmas shopping, there was a ton of people in the mall and in the shopping center he was at. Now, this was back in the day where people actually went to the mall, not just bought everything on Amazon, but it was so crowded, he saw a chainsaw in the window on display and just had this thought of taking the chainsaw and slashing through everyone to make his way through the mall. Apparently, that's how the story goes. What that says about Tobe Hooper, I'll let you come to the conclusion. But that's kind of what I like about the movie, is how visceral it feels, how raw it feels. This movie was really done on the cheap, really cheap-looking movie, but what it's able to achieve with that cheapness, it really brings the movie to life. Structurally, narratively, this is a very basic movie. A lot of movies have this format these days. 5 kids, they arrive at Station 1. Station 1 is a little weird. They go to Station 2. Station 2 is an exaggeration of what we saw in Station 1. You have 5 friends, 1 survivor. The final survivor has to escape. Each of the friends gets slashed one by one. It's a very, very simple structure for a horror movie, and it's not very groundbreaking in that remarks. I think because of the success of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a lot of movies just borrowed its format, but it's not the most original thing out there. It's really more of an ambience piece. It's one you watch for the mood, for the unsettling atmosphere. That's why you watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and of course because Leatherface is such an iconic antagonist at this point, that's another reason to watch it. The characters feel very one note. There's not much to them. They're kind of just cannon fodder. There are a bunch of meat costumes ready to get slashed by Leatherface. The one character I find exceptionally annoying is the character of Franklin. He's just constantly whining, and on the one hand, I understand him. He's in a wheelchair. His friends are not very considerate. They always leave him behind. But his performance is more like, it's a bit too over the top. Like when he gets cut in the van by the hitchhiker, he's almost crying. Wah!
man. Oh, I'm about half ready to call a cop.
It's very over-the-top performance and kind of takes me out of the movie. If there's one criticism I can give with the movie, would be Franklin's performance kind of takes me out of it. That said, the movie feels very raw, very, very gross, very unsettling, but there's not much violence to it. It's not a very gory film. When Franklin does get killed in the movie, they don't even show any blood. There's a bit of blood that splatters on Leatherface's face.
Sally, I hear something. Stop. Stop.
There's a bit of blood. It's not the goriest movie out there. All of the violence is very suggested. When the characters are thrown on the meat hooks, you don't see much blood. You don't see the hook piercing through the spine or anything like that. But you see that and you kind of squirm because you have the idea of, ooh, what if I got a hook that big in my back? That's kind of where the horror comes. And a lot of it is because it's the same thing as Jaws. They didn't have the money to probably show all those details. But there's just the suggestion of it is enough for me. It really is an immersive movie because of that very raw nature of it. A lot of people consider it to be one of the first found footage mockumentaries. I don't go that far. It still does feel very much like a narrative. There's a lot of beautiful shots in the movie. Despite it having a very small budget, there's some really nice dolly shots when you're outside of the Sawyer household. It's a very beautiful looking movie when it comes to its cinematography. But I can see why people would consider it to be a found footage, quote unquote, or a mockumentary horror. I can see that in certain regards, but I just think there's too much leeway when it comes to that. And another thing that adds to the horror is that they don't explain anything. This really is just a bunch of weird hicks laying in the middle of Texas. They don't give explanation to anything. At some point, Leatherface is dressed like a woman, and they don't bother explaining it, which is a good contrast to Psycho, which kind of had the same element, and arguably Texas Chainsaw lent its elements from Psycho. But when we find out that Anthony Perkins is dressed like his mother, the police detective has to give a whole explanation to the audience as to what's going on. This movie doesn't feel the need to do that. All of a sudden, he's wearing a woman's face, and he's wearing a woman's wig, and he's kind of acting like a woman. I love that dinner scene where the last survivor is eating dinner with the Sawyer family, and it's just really weird and gross, and there's this really odd family dynamic. It feels like a family that's crumbling apart. The matriarch is dead, the patriarch is kind of just like one foot in the grave, and you have like these two hillbilly sons and their friend, and it's like kind of just this family dynamic that's crumbling apart, and it's just this really weird, unsettling vibe. And they give no explanation to it. Who these characters are, we don't know. It's just these crazy people we've just encountered at the same time as the characters. I like that about the movie. Also, I've read up on this movie as well. Apparently, this movie was so cheap. It was filmed during a heat wave in Texas. They used real animals for the set design. They used real food as well. And because of that, it smelled so bad on set. And because of that, too, the makeup is really crappy. Grandpa Sawyer does not look like an old man. He really much looks like a guy with a thick layer of makeup on him. But again, that's part of the charm of the movie. It's just, you can feel that kind of heat coming from the film hitting you. It's like that makeup is just dripping off. It almost looks like these characters are decomposing before your very eyes. As a matter of fact, the movie opens with a decomposing body. It just that heat that this movie gives, it's like, ugh. It makes you want to take a shower after you watch the movie. And again, because there's so much suggested violence, there's not that much violence shown to the audience. It really adds to that horror. One of my favorite moments and the greatest suspenseful moment of the movie is when Grandpa Sawyer has the sledgehammer and the family is trying to get Grandpa Sawyer to smash the woman's head with the sledgehammer, and he's so weak and frail that he keeps missing. And every time he misses, it's like the audience is like, oh my God, just get it over with. Just fucking do it already. Jeez. That, and there's a really good twist in the movie where when you're first introduced to Grandpa Sawyer, he's not moving at all. So you just think it's a dead corpse because you just saw the dead corpse of his wife. You assume this is a dead corpse. And all of a sudden he starts moving and he starts sucking the blood off the fingertip of the girl. And you're like, oh shit, he's alive. The first time I watched this movie, that really took me off guard and really made me uncomfortable. It was like, oh shit, he's actually alive. Ugh. And obviously, the most iconic moment of this movie is the ending, where Leatherface is just throwing around his chainsaw, going in circles like a madman. It's something that the later movies totally miss the mark on when it comes to what makes the Texas Chainsaw Massacre so great. Is that you really feel like this is a poor rural area with like a bunch of inbred hicks. And when you watch the later movies, I remember watching the remake with Jessica Biel, and it's just the production value is so high, you kind of lose that factor. And they try to compensate by that, and they say, well, Texas Chainsaw Massacre was considered a very gory movie for its time, so they try to compensate with that with adding more gore, having more blood spurts, having more intestines flying around. Again, that's not what made Texas Chainsaw Massacre a good movie. It really is a masterclass at two things: creating atmosphere, creating suspense. That's the only two things that Texas Chainsaw Massacre does extremely well. I think that's what makes it such a memorable movie. And because of that, you're willing to forgive its cheap budget, its flat characters, its very structural narrative, just because the atmosphere is so compelling. Another thing that annoys me about the remakes and later sequels is that they kind of miss the mark on who's Leatherface. To me, Leatherface is just this giant goof. He's not the brightest guy. He's inbred, probably. He's not smart. He's not an unstoppable force. He's just a crazy guy running around with a chainsaw. And that's kind of what makes him scary, is that he is that lower intellect guy. And because of that, you don't know what his next move is going to be. Same thing with the hitchhiker we encounter in the van. He's just very stupid, very naive, very dumb.
Hey, my brother worked there. My grandfather, too.
So you don't know what his next move is going to be. And I feel like later movies, they just turn Leatherface into this Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers guy where it's just an unstoppable force. To me, that's not what makes Leatherface scary. What makes Leatherface scary is that behind that mask he wears is this just a giant baby. And because of that, you just don't know what his next move is going to be. But for the modern audience, it makes more sense. Just make him another Michael Myers. Just make him another Jason Voorhees, an unstoppable force to be reckoned with. Yeah, I don't know. That's how I feel about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, one of the greatest horror movies ever made. I can talk about this forever. Guys, what do you think of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Comment below, let me know, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.